Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. It all started when I moved to the city for college. I was fresh out of high school, ready to take on the world, and the idea of finding love through a dating app seemed like a fun adventure. Everyone was doing it. So I downloaded Hinge, set up my profile, and began swiping through faces, eager to find someone who shared my interests. I never thought I'd end up in a situation that would leave me questioning my own sanity. There was this one guy whose profile caught my eye. He had this smirk that seemed both charming and a little off. His bio was vague but intriguing, filled with quotes about darkness and the beauty of night. I thought it was artsy and mysterious, so I decided to swipe right. Almost immediately, we matched. His name was Leo, and he was just a few years older than me. We chatted about our favorite movies and music, and I could feel the chemistry through the screen. He asked me out for coffee, and I, buoyed by the thrill of it all, agreed. The day of our date arrived, and I found myself nervously adjusting my outfit in the mirror. I chose a simple, comfortable look that felt right for a coffee shop. When I arrived at the cafe, I scanned the room, hoping to spot Leo. He was already there, sitting at a corner table, his eyes glued to his phone. As I approached, he looked up and smiled, but something about his gaze sent a tiny jolt through me. Still, I brushed it off, chalking it up to nerves. The conversation flowed easily at first. Leo was engaging, funny, and had a way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. But then, as the coffee cups emptied, I noticed a shift in his demeanor. He started asking me more personal questions, probing into my life in ways that felt invasive. I thought it might just be his curiosity, but my gut told me something was off. I tried to redirect the conversation, but he kept bringing it back to darker subjects: fear, loss, and loneliness. At some point, I excused myself to the restroom, desperately needing a moment to collect my thoughts. As I splashed cold water on my face, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. My heart raced. Was I overreacting? Leo was just a guy I met online. I could walk away if things felt wrong. When I returned to the table, I noticed his expression had shifted entirely. He was staring out the window, and I could see the tension in his jaw. I felt a chill creeping up my spine as I slid back into my seat. I didn't want to seem rude, but I was ready to end the date. I faked a smile, hoping to lighten the mood, but it didn't work. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. He spoke about the thrill of the unknown, the excitement of the hunt. My skin prickled. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. This wasn't what I signed up for. I made an excuse about needing to study and got up to leave. He didn't move, just watched me with that same unsettling smile. As I walked away, I glanced back at him, and for a moment, our eyes locked. It was a strange moment, filled with an intensity that sent a rush of adrenaline through me. I hurried out of the cafe, my heart pounding. I had barely made it home when I realized I hadn't blocked him on Hinge. I quickly opened the app and did just that, feeling a rush of relief as I did so. But that relief was short-lived. Later that night, I received a notification. It was a message from Leo. My stomach dropped as I opened it, half expecting something threatening. Instead, it was a photo of my apartment building taken from the street. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told him where I lived. I quickly locked my door and closed the blinds, feeling as if I was being watched. The next few days were a blur of paranoia. Every time I heard a noise outside, every time I saw a shadow move, my heart raced. I avoided going out at night and changed my daily routine to be as unpredictable as possible. I convinced myself that I was just overreacting, that Leo was just a creepy guy who didn't know when to take a hint. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then came the night that changed everything. I was studying late in my room, the glow of my laptop lighting up the dark space around me. My phone buzzed with another message. It was from Leo again, but this time it was a video. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it open, and my heart nearly stopped. It was a live feed of my apartment. He was outside, standing in the shadows, watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I scrambled to turn off my phone, panic flooding my system. I rushed to the window, peeking through the blinds. There he was, just as he appeared in the video, his eyes locked on my window. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped, like a mouse cornered by a cat. My mind raced as I recalled his earlier words about the hunt. Was this his idea of a game? I grabbed my phone to call the police, but hesitated. What could I even say? I went on a date with this guy and now he's stalking me. I felt ridiculous. Then he moved. I watched in horror as he stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. I waited, every second feeling like an eternity. I should have called the cops, but I felt paralyzed. Finally, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wouldn't let him control me. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out the back door. I was determined to confront him. I walked through the alley behind my building, nerves firing in every direction. The streetlights flickered above, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I had to find him. My heart raced with both fear and adrenaline. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps behind me. I turned around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty alley stretching out into the darkness. I picked up my pace, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. My instinct screamed that I was being followed. Then, near the end of the alley, I saw him. Leo stood there, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed and a grin plastered on his face. He looked calm, almost amused. I took a step back, my breath quickening. What do you want? I wanted to shout, but the words caught in my throat. He pushed off the wall and stepped closer. You shouldn't have left your apartment. It's safer inside, he said, his voice low and smooth. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't just a creepy guy anymore. He was playing with me. In a moment of sheer instinct, I turned and ran. I could hear him behind me, the sound of his footsteps echoing off the brick walls. I sprinted down the street, weaving through shadows, my heart pounding in my ears. I could feel him gaining on me, and I pushed myself harder. I didn't stop until I reached a busy street, filled with people. I turned around, gasping for breath, scanning the crowd for any sign of him. But there was no Leo, only strangers. I felt a mix of relief and confusion. Had I escaped? My chest heaved as I leaned against a lamppost, trying to shake the panic. But then, as I caught my breath, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was another message from Leo. I hesitated, but I opened it, my heart sinking. It was a simple text. You're not alone anymore. My blood ran cold. I turned quickly to look behind me, and that's when I saw him. He was standing at the corner, watching me with that unsettling smile, blending into the crowd like a ghost. My breath caught in my throat as I realized I hadn't escaped at all. The hunt was just beginning. It was one of those weeks where the world felt heavy, and the solitude wrapped around me like a thick fog. I had just come out of a relationship that felt more like a prison than a partnership, and I was ready to dive back into the dating pool, even if it was just to distract myself. So I downloaded Hinge and began scrolling through profiles, searching for someone who could bring a little excitement back into my life. As I flipped through faces and bios, I noticed one profile that grabbed my attention. His name was Jake, and he had a smirk that seemed to promise mischief. His bio was a mix of humor and charm, mentioning that he loved late-night drives and horror movies. I felt a spark of connection. I swiped right, half expecting it to be another ghosting situation, but to my surprise, we matched. My heart raced as I typed out a message, our conversation flowing easily as if we'd known each other for years. The night wore on, and the conversation grew deeper. Jake shared stories about his childhood, filled with eerie tales of ghost sightings in his small town. I felt drawn to him, the darkness of his past somehow comforting. He seemed to understand me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. As I lay in bed, I could hear the distant sounds of the city outside my window, but they faded into the background as I focused on the screen and the words that lit it up. After a few days of chatting, Jake suggested we meet. He proposed a local diner that had a reputation for its late-night atmosphere, claiming it would be the perfect spot for a horror movie lover's first date. I felt a mix of excitement and nerves as I agreed. The thought of finally meeting him in person made my stomach flutter. The night of our date arrived, and I dressed carefully, wanting to look casual yet cute. The diner was a short drive from my apartment, and as I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed the flickering neon sign above the entrance. The place had an old-school vibe, with red vinyl booths and black and white checkered floors. I stepped inside, the smell of fries and burgers wafting through the air, mingling with the faint sound of an old horror film playing on a small screen in the corner. Jake was already there, sitting in a booth at the back, looking relaxed. He waved as I approached, and I couldn't help but smile. We chatted effortlessly over milkshakes and fries, exchanging stories and laughter. But as the night wore on, I noticed something strange about him. There was a flicker of intensity in his eyes when he spoke about the haunted house he grew up in, a place filled with shadows and whispers. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was just the atmosphere of the diner, or perhaps the stories he told were creeping me out more than I wanted to admit. As we finished our meal, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as he spoke about a local legend concerning a haunted woods not far from the diner. He suggested we check it out, and despite a flutter of unease in my stomach, I found myself intrigued. The woods were dark when we arrived, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. Jake led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing gnarled roots and twisted branches. I followed closely behind, my heart racing with both excitement and fear. He told me stories of the spirits that were said to roam these woods, and I could feel the tension building between us. A mix of adrenaline and something else, something darker. As we walked deeper into the woods, the trees began to close in around us, and the only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. It felt like we had stepped into another world, one where time didn't exist. The thrill of the unknown wrapped around me, but with it came a creeping sense of dread. I glanced at Jake, who seemed lost in his own thoughts, his expression unreadable. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine when I heard a whisper, soft and low, floating through the air. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding as I scanned the darkness around us. Jake turned, his eyes wide with excitement, as if he had heard it too. He urged me to keep going, claiming it was just the wind playing tricks. Against my better judgment, I followed him deeper into the woods, adrenaline pumping through my veins. We stumbled upon a clearing, illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. In the center stood an old, decrepit cabin, its windows dark and foreboding. Jake's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as he approached it, excitement radiating off him. I felt a shiver of hesitation but followed, curiosity getting the better of me. He pushed the creaking door open, and the scent of decay hit me like a wave. Inside, the air was thick and stale, filled with the remnants of something long forgotten. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the floorboards groaned under our weight. Jake ventured further inside, his flashlight beam dancing across the room, revealing old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. I hesitated at the threshold, an instinct telling me to turn back, but something compelled me to stay. As Jake rummaged through the debris, he found an old, dusty photo album. He flipped it open, revealing black and white photographs of people I didn't recognize. But as I leaned in closer, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. One of the faces looked eerily familiar. It was a woman who resembled me, but the photo was dated decades earlier. I stumbled back, my heart racing, confusion and fear washing over me. Jake looked up, his expression shifting from excitement to something darker, more predatory. The glint in his eyes sent a shiver down my spine. He stepped closer, invading my space, and I felt the air grow heavy with tension. I tried to back away, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. He leaned in, whispering about the legend of the cabin, how it was said to hold the spirits of those who had vanished from the world. I realized with a sinking feeling that he was playing a game, one that I hadn't signed up for. The stories he told, the way he had coaxed me into the woods, it all felt like a trap. In a moment of panic, I turned to flee, pushing past him and darting out of the cabin. I could hear him calling after me, but I didn't stop. The darkness enveloped me as I ran through the trees, branches clawing at my skin, the whispering voices echoing in my mind. I didn't look back until I reached my car, fumbling for my keys as I glanced into the woods, half expecting to see him emerging from the shadows. I didn't see him, but the feeling of being watched lingered as I sped away, the glow of the diner fading into the distance. I thought I had escaped, but the unease settled in my gut like a stone. I deleted the Hinge app as soon as I got home, hoping to erase the encounter entirely. Weeks passed, and I tried to forget about Jake, the cabin, and the chilling night. But one evening, while scrolling through my social media feed, a notification caught my eye. It was a post from a local news outlet featuring a story about a young woman who had gone missing in the woods near the diner. The photo accompanying the article made my blood run cold. It was the same woman from the photo album. I dropped my phone, my heart racing as I connected the dots. The cabin wasn't just a haunted relic. It was a place where lives had been lost, where Jake had lured me into a web of darkness. The realization crashed over me, and I felt the chill of terror seep into my bones. The hunter had become the hunted, and I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than I could have imagined. I always thought online dating was a bit of a gamble, but I figured it was worth a shot. I found this app called Hinge, which was supposed to be different from all the other dating platforms. It was all about creating meaningful connections, or at least that's what they claimed. I swiped through profiles one rainy Saturday night, looking for someone who might share my interests. That's when I stumbled upon Jamie's profile. The photos were casual but captivating. There was something about the way Jamie smiled, a hint of mischief in those eyes that drew me in. We matched almost immediately, and I felt a rush of excitement. Jamie's bio was quirky and intriguing, listing a love for horror movies, hiking, and coffee. We exchanged messages, and I learned that Jamie lived in a small town, not too far from mine. After a few days of chatting, I felt comfortable enough to suggest we meet up. Jamie agreed, and we settled on a cozy cafe that had an old-world charm, complete with creaky wooden floors and dim lighting. The day of our date arrived, and I found myself pacing back and forth in front of the cafe, a mix of nervousness and anticipation fluttering in my stomach. The cafe had this eerie, almost haunting vibe, with its vintage decor and the way the shadows danced in the corners. I brushed it off as part of its charm. When Jamie walked in, I was struck by how different they looked from their photos. The smile was the same, but there was an intensity in Jamie's eyes that sent a chill up my spine. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily, but there was something unsettling in the air. Jamie seemed to have an uncanny interest in dark topics, sharing stories about the creepy places they'd visited and strange urban legends they had heard. I laughed it off, trying to match their energy, but a part of me felt uncomfortable. As the night wore on, the cafe emptied, and the atmosphere grew heavier. It was as if the shadows were closing in around us. When the cafe staff finally asked us to leave, I stepped out into the cool night air, relieved. Jamie insisted on walking me to my car, which was parked a few blocks away. As we strolled down the dimly lit street, I could feel Jamie's presence beside me, overwhelming yet oddly comforting. I glanced at them, trying to shake off the dark thoughts that had started creeping in. It was just a date, right? Nothing to fear. But then Jamie pointed out a small alley, and curiosity piqued my interest. "Have you ever been down there?" they asked, their voice dripping with intrigue. I shook my head, feeling a mixture of dread and excitement. The alley was narrow, lined with old brick walls that seemed to close in as we ventured further. The air grew thick, the shadows deepening. I could hear the distant sound of laughter and music fading away as we walked deeper into this forgotten part of town. Jamie spoke about a local legend, a tale of a young woman who had vanished in this very alley years ago. They recounted the eerie details with a fervor that made my skin crawl. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But it was just us, and yet the feeling of being watched was palpable. We reached a dead end, where the alley narrowed into a small courtyard, overgrown with weeds and littered with forgotten items. It felt wrong, like we had stepped into another world. I wanted to turn back, but Jamie seemed unbothered, pointing out the graffiti on the walls, their eyes sparkling with excitement. "Isn't it beautiful?" they asked, and I forced a smile, though my heart raced in my chest. Suddenly, Jamie's demeanor shifted. They became serious, their eyes darkening. "Do you believe in spirits?" they asked, and I laughed nervously, unsure if they were joking. Jamie stepped closer, lowering their voice. "Some say the girl who vanished still haunts these streets, searching for someone to take her place." I felt a chill run through me, and I took a step back, glancing around as the world outside felt distant. The laughter and music had vanished completely, replaced by an unsettling silence. I turned to leave, but Jamie grabbed my arm, their grip tight and unyielding. "You're not scared, are you?" they challenged, a glint of something dark in their eyes. "Of course not," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But the truth was, I was terrified. I managed to pull away and began walking back toward the entrance of the alley. Jamie followed closely, their footsteps echoing behind me like a haunting reminder of my choice to walk into the darkness. As we reached the end of the alley, I felt a sudden rush of relief. I stepped into the streetlight, where the warmth and visibility made me feel safe again. But Jamie lingered behind, the shadows clinging to them like a shroud. "You know, they say once you enter the dark, it's hard to find your way back," they said, their tone low and ominous. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, and for a moment, I swore I could see a flicker of something unnatural in their eyes. I took a step back, feeling the panic rise within me. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew I needed to get away. "I think I should head home," I said, trying to maintain my composure. Jamie's smile faded, replaced by a look of disappointment that sent a shiver down my spine. "But you don't have to go just yet," they urged, their voice softer but laced with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I hurried to my car, fumbling with the keys as I felt Jamie's gaze on me. I finally got the door open and slid inside, locking it behind me. I glanced up to see Jamie standing by the curb, their expression unreadable. I started the engine, and as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving something behind, something sinister. The next day, I received a message from Jamie, asking if I wanted to meet again. I hesitated, recalling the night's events. Something felt off, but I was also drawn back to the initial connection we had. I decided to give it another shot, hoping the date would clear the air. When I arrived at the cafe again, a sense of dread washed over me. Jamie was already there, their demeanor calm, almost too calm. I sat down, and we exchanged awkward pleasantries, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, I noticed Jamie's gaze linger on me a little too long, their smile too wide. "Do you ever think about that alley?" they asked suddenly, their tone shifting to something more sinister. My heart raced as I tried to laugh it off, but the weight of their words hung heavily in the air. "It's just a place," I replied, though I could feel the unease creeping back in. But then Jamie leaned in closer, their eyes narrowing. "You know, they say that once you've walked into the dark, you can never truly leave," they whispered, a chilling smile on their face. I felt my breath hitch in my throat. It was as if the very air around us had thickened, suffocating me. I tried to excuse myself, but Jamie reached out, their fingers brushing against my wrist, sending a jolt of panic through me. The cafe felt like it was closing in, the walls pressing against me, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. In that moment, I made a decision. I pulled away, standing up abruptly, and as I turned to leave, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I didn't look back as I dashed toward the door, my heart racing. I could hear Jamie calling after me, but their voice faded into a distant echo as I stepped outside. The street felt different in the daylight, the shadows no longer holding the same power. I felt free, liberated from the weight of that darkness. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, as if Jamie was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Days turned into weeks, and I managed to convince myself that it was just a bad experience. I deleted the Hinge app, swearing off online dating for good. But then, one evening, I received a notification on my phone, a new message from Jamie. My heart sank as I opened it, and my blood ran cold. "Did you really think you could leave? I'll see you soon." The words sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt the world around me tilt. I turned off my phone and stared out the window, feeling the weight of the darkness creeping back in. I had thought I could escape it, but Jamie was a part of me now, a haunting reminder that some connections are far too deep to sever. I found myself swiping left and right, looking for someone who could make me forget the mundane grind of the week. Most profiles were the same: gym selfies, motivational quotes, and a few too many pictures of food. But then there was him, a guy named Jake. His profile was minimalistic, just a single photo where he looked genuinely happy, a big grin plastered across his face, with a backdrop of a sprawling forest. He wrote about his love for nature, hiking, and the thrill of spontaneous adventures. It sounded pretty cliché, but something about his energy pulled me in. I swiped right without thinking twice, and to my surprise, we matched almost immediately. We started chatting, and Jake was charming, witty, and had a knack for keeping the conversation flowing. As the clock ticked towards midnight, I felt a strange thrill. We talked about everything: favorite movies, travel dreams, and childhood memories. The conversation felt so easy, so right, that I didn't even notice how the atmosphere in my small apartment began to shift. The storm outside raged on, rattling the windows, and the lights flickered ominously. In the middle of our chat, Jake suggested we meet up. My heart raced at the thought. I had never been the type to meet someone from a dating app, but his enthusiasm was infectious. He proposed a hike at a nearby nature reserve the following day. There was something exciting about the idea of stepping into the unknown with someone who seemed genuine. After a little hesitation, I agreed. I spent the night tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling of dread that crept in like the shadows around me. What if he wasn't who he claimed to be? But the excitement of the potential connection overshadowed my fears, and I finally drifted off to sleep, dreaming of forest trails and starry skies. The next day dawned bright and clear. I dressed comfortably, wearing my favorite hiking boots and a light jacket. I arrived at the nature reserve, heart pounding and palms sweaty, a mix of excitement and nerves bubbling within me. The forest was alive with sounds: the rustle of leaves, the distant chirping of birds, and the soft crunch of twigs underfoot. As I walked down the winding path, I noticed how the sunlight broke through the trees, creating a dappled pattern on the ground. It was beautiful, but I felt a twinge of anxiety. What would Jake be like in person? Would he still have that magnetic energy? A few minutes passed, and I spotted him. He looked just like his profile picture, but there was something different. The smile seemed a bit too wide, and his eyes held an intensity that made me uneasy. Still, I pushed aside my worries. We exchanged pleasantries, and he suggested we head deeper into the woods, to a secluded spot he knew. As we walked, the conversation flowed just as easily as it had online. Jake was animated, speaking passionately about his love for the outdoors. But as we ventured further, the atmosphere shifted. The trees grew denser, and the sunlight faded, casting eerie shadows around us. I could hear the wind whispering through the leaves, and a chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off as nerves. After a while, we reached a clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley below. It was stunning, a picturesque glimpse of nature's beauty. We sat on a fallen log, and Jake pulled out a small thermos filled with hot cocoa. He offered me a cup, and as I took it, I noticed something in his demeanor. He was watching me, his gaze too intense, too fixated. We talked more, but I felt an unsettling feeling creep in. It was like I was in a movie, the kind where you suddenly realize something is not right. I tried to shake it off, but the unease grew. Jake started to ask me personal questions that felt too probing, too invasive. My instincts kicked in, and I knew I had to be careful. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the shadows lengthened, and I felt an overwhelming urge to leave. I suggested we head back, but Jake insisted we stay a little longer to enjoy the view. Something in his voice sent a chill through me. The way he spoke was calm, almost too calm, and I could feel the tension in the air. I stood up, ready to walk back, but he grabbed my wrist, his grip firm yet unsettling. I looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of the person I'd been chatting with online. But all I saw was a strange glint, a flicker of something dark. Panic set in, and my heart raced as I pulled away, finally breaking free from his hold. I turned and bolted down the path, adrenaline surging through my veins. I could hear him calling after me, but I didn't look back. The forest felt alive, the branches seeming to reach out as I dashed past. The crunch of leaves underfoot echoed in my ears, and the sound of my heartbeat drowned out everything else. As I ran, the path twisted and turned, and I lost my sense of direction. The trees loomed overhead, and the shadows seemed to dance around me. I stumbled and fell, scraping my palms against the rough ground. Panic clawed at my throat as I scrambled to my feet and kept going. Finally, I burst out of the trees and onto the main road. My breath came in sharp gasps, and I looked back, half expecting to see Jake emerging from the woods. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the distant sound of thunder rolling in. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as my hand shook. I didn't stop to think, just got in and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, heart racing and mind racing faster, processing what just happened. I was shaken but relieved to be safe. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows in the rearview mirror seemed to play tricks on my mind. I got home, locked all the doors, and sat in the dim light of my apartment, the storm raging outside. Later that night, I opened the dating app again, my heart thumping in my chest. I scrolled through my matches, and there it was, a new notification from Jake. My stomach dropped as I read the message. You shouldn't have run away. The real adventure is just beginning. The screen flickered, and I felt the weight of the darkness settling around me. I had thought I'd escaped, but in that moment, I realized I had only just begun to play his game. My friends joked that I was the queen of online dating, swiping left and right with the precision of a seasoned pro. But the truth was, I had my reasons. Trust was hard for me, especially since the last relationship I had ended in betrayal that made me question everything I thought I knew about people. So, when I downloaded Hinge one rainy afternoon, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe I could find someone genuine, someone who wouldn't turn out to be a ghost from my past. Scrolling through profiles, I stumbled upon Adam. His pictures were casual yet intriguing, a blend of goofy and charming, with a strong jaw and bright blue eyes that seemed to pierce right through the screen. He had a love for hiking and photography, and his bio mentioned something about wanting to capture the beauty of life. I felt drawn to him. I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched almost instantly. My heart raced. We started chatting, and our conversations flowed easily. He was witty, intelligent, and I felt an instant connection. It was refreshing, a spark that had been missing for a while. After a few days of texting, Adam suggested we meet for coffee at a quaint little cafe he loved. I hesitated at first, but I was tired of overthinking everything. I agreed, and we set a date for Saturday afternoon. The anticipation was intoxicating, and I spent the next few days picking out the perfect outfit and rehearsing how I would act in front of him. On the day of our meeting, rain poured relentlessly, creating a gloomy backdrop that oddly matched my nerves. I arrived at the cafe, the bell above the door jingling softly as I stepped inside. The warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped me, contrasting sharply with the cold, wet air outside. I found a table by the window and settled in, glancing around for Adam. My heart sank a little when I realized I was early, but I pushed the thought aside. Minutes ticked by, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The cafe was unusually quiet, the hushed conversations of patrons feeling almost conspiratorial. I pulled out my phone to check the time, but just as I did, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see Adam standing there, a sheepish smile on his face, his hair damp from the rain. He looked even better in person, and I felt my earlier unease melt away. We exchanged pleasantries and settled into conversation, but as we talked, I began to notice odd things. He kept glancing around the cafe, as if he were searching for someone. It wasn't just casual glances. There was a tension in his posture that made me uneasy. I tried to brush it off, focusing instead on our conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As we talked about our interests and shared stories, I noticed a woman sitting alone at a nearby table, her eyes fixed on us. She was dressed in all black, Her hair pulled back tightly, and she had an unsettling intensity about her. I felt a chill run down my spine as she seemed to lean in closer, her gaze unblinking. I tried to ignore her, but each time I looked away, I could feel her eyes on me, as if she were peeling back my layers, exposing my vulnerabilities. Adam must have noticed my discomfort because he shifted his attention to the woman, his expression darkening. "Let's move to a different spot," he suggested, a hint of urgency in his voice. I nodded, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere, and we moved to a small corner table, away from the woman's piercing gaze. But even in our new spot, the tension lingered. The woman still watched us, her presence looming like a shadow. I could feel my heart racing as Adam spoke, his voice low and steady, but I was distracted by the strange energy in the air. I began to second-guess everything I thought I knew about this man. Was he truly who he said he was? As we finished our drinks, I noticed Adam's demeanor change. He became more serious, his eyes darting back to the woman. I followed his gaze and saw her getting up to leave, her eyes lingering on us one last time before she walked out the door. A wave of relief washed over me as the tension seemed to dissipate, but Adam's expression didn't change. He seemed frozen, staring at the door long after she had gone. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to break the silence that hung heavy between us. He turned to me, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just didn't expect to see her here." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach tightened. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into something much darker than I had anticipated. The conversation resumed, but it felt strained. I never thought I'd find myself on a dating app, let alone one called Hinge. My friends had been raving about it for weeks, convinced that it was the place to find real connections. So, after a couple of glasses of wine and a healthy dose of peer pressure, I downloaded the app. It felt oddly exciting, swiping through profiles, trying to decipher who might be worth my time. A few matches came and went, just casual chats that fizzled out before they even sparked. But then I stumbled across a profile that caught my eye. His name was Ben. His pictures showcased a charming smile and an adventurous spirit. The bio was short but sweet, filled with hints of spontaneity and a love for the outdoors. We began chatting, and the conversation flowed easily, like we were old friends catching up rather than two strangers meeting online. He suggested we meet up for a hike at a local trail, and I eagerly agreed. The day of our hike arrived, and I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. I chose a comfortable outfit and made sure to grab my water bottle and some snacks. The sun was shining, and the weather felt perfect, almost too perfect. I arrived at the trailhead about 10 minutes early, scanning the area for a glimpse of Ben. As I waited, my mind began to race. What if he wasn't what he seemed? What if he was some kind of creep? I brushed the thoughts aside, reminding myself that I was being ridiculous. Finally, I spotted him walking towards me. He looked just like his pictures, and for a moment, I relaxed. We exchanged pleasantries and set off down the trail, chatting about our lives, favorite hikes, and random interests. The conversation felt easy, and I found myself laughing more than I had in a long time. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the atmosphere began to shift. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the ground. The deeper we went, the more isolated we became. I could hear the rustling of leaves and the occasional distant bird calls, but there was an unsettling silence that seemed to blanket the air. I chalked it up to nerves, but a small voice in my head kept nagging me that something was off. Ben suggested we take a detour off the main trail to explore a less-traveled path. I hesitated for a moment, but his enthusiasm was infectious, and I didn't want to seem unadventurous. So I followed him. The path narrowed, and the trees closed in around us. The sounds of the outside world started to fade, replaced by an almost oppressive stillness. We kept walking, and after a while, I noticed that the trail was growing increasingly overgrown. The underbrush was thick, and I could feel the dampness of the earth beneath my shoes. I glanced at Ben, who seemed completely unfazed, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if he were searching for something. I tried to shake off the uncomfortable feeling that was beginning to seep into my bones. Suddenly, Ben stopped and pointed off into the trees. "Look at that!" he exclaimed. his voice echoing through the otherwise quiet woods. I looked where he was pointing and saw what appeared to be an old, crumbling cabin partially hidden by vines and foliage. It looked abandoned, and I felt a chill run through me. He insisted we check it out, and I hesitated again. The cabin looked ancient, like something out of a horror movie. It seemed wrong to venture inside, but Ben's excitement was contagious, and I didn't want to be the party pooper. I followed him toward the cabin, my heart racing with a mix of anticipation and dread. As we approached, I noticed strange markings etched into the wooden door, almost like symbols I couldn't quite decipher. The door creaked ominously as Ben pushed it open, revealing a dark interior. I hesitated on the threshold, feeling an instinctive pull to turn back. But Ben stepped inside, and I didn't want to be left alone outside in the darkening woods. The interior was musty and dim, filled with shadows that danced around us as we explored. Old furniture lay scattered about, covered in dust and cobwebs. It felt as though we were intruding on a forgotten past. I tried to shake the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just an old cabin. As we moved deeper into the cabin, I noticed a series of photographs hanging on the walls. They were black and white images of people I didn't recognize, their expressions haunting and vacant. The air felt thicker, and I could sense my heart rate quickening. Ben seemed oblivious to my growing discomfort, engrossed in the strange artifacts littered throughout the cabin. Just then, I heard a noise outside, a faint rustling like footsteps. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. I glanced at Ben, who was still rifling through some old boxes. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I was paralyzed with fear. I wanted to grab Ben and bolt, but I couldn't find the words. The rustling grew closer, and I could see through the grimy window that shadows were moving just beyond the tree line. A knot of panic twisted in my stomach. I finally found my voice, urging Ben to leave, but as I turned to him, I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. His eyes had shifted, a wild glint now residing in them, and a smile crept across his face that felt wrong. "Just a little longer," he said, his voice low and almost hypnotic. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This wasn't the same guy I'd been hiking with. I backed away slowly, my instincts kicking in. His demeanor shifted again, and for a moment, I thought I saw something pass over his face, a flicker of something dark and sinister. The rustling outside grew louder, and I felt my heart race as I turned to the door, my mind screaming for escape. I lunged for it, but Ben blocked my path, moving with a speed that seemed unnatural. "You don't want to leave yet," he said, his voice now a low growl. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I pushed past him, sprinting towards the door. I burst outside into the fading light, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back, just ran. The underbrush snagged at my clothes, branches slapping against my arms as I stumbled through the trees, heart pounding in my ears. I could hear Ben's footsteps behind me, his laughter echoing through the woods. "You can't run away from me," he called, the sound twisting my stomach. I didn't stop to think, just ran until I could barely breathe, until I finally broke free from the trees and onto the main trail. I was almost at my car when I heard a voice calling to me from behind, a voice that sounded eerily familiar. I turned, and there he was, standing just at the edge of the trees, looking perfectly composed. "I told you not to run," he said, his smile wide and unsettling. But it wasn't his words that froze me. It was the realization that he had somehow gotten in front of me, like he'd anticipated my every move. My heart dropped as I looked around, realizing I was utterly alone. The path was deserted, the woods now devoid of any sound. I started to back away, but my feet felt heavy, as if the ground itself were pulling me down. Ben stepped closer, his eyes glinting with a manic light. "You were never meant to leave," he said softly, and in that moment, I understood that I wasn't just a random date to him. I was something much darker, a piece in a game I hadn't known I was playing. Fear coursed through me as I turned to run again, but the woods had changed, twisting around me, leading me back toward the cabin. With every step, the shadows deepened, swallowing my escape. I was trapped in a nightmarish loop, and as I looked back, I saw Ben grinning, the darkness behind him shifting like a living entity. In that moment, I realized my fate was sealed. I had stepped into a world beyond my understanding, one where the thrill of adventure had morphed into a desperate struggle for survival. And as I stumbled back into the cabin, the door creaking ominously behind me, I knew the game was just beginning. I never thought I'd find myself scrolling through a dating app late at night, but there I was, wrapped in a blanket, the glow of my phone illuminating the dark corners of my messy room. I had just come off a string of bad dates and figured I'd give this new app, Hinge, a shot. The ads promised meaningful connections, and honestly, I was desperate for something, anything, other than the usual small talk. As I swiped through profiles, I noticed a guy named Jake. He had this magnetic smile, and his profile was filled with witty comments about his love for horror movies and late-night snacks. I chuckled at his bio, something about wanting to find someone to binge-watch scary films with and share a bowl of popcorn. It seemed innocent enough, and I felt a little spark of interest. After a few back-and-forth messages, we decided to meet up. He suggested a small, dimly lit cafe on the edge of town. The place had a cozy, almost eerie vibe, with dark wooden furniture and vintage posters of old horror flicks lining the walls. When I arrived, Jake was already there, sitting at a corner table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. He looked just like his pictures, only more handsome in person. We talked for hours, sharing our favorite horror stories and laughing at our shared love for the genre. I was surprised at how easy it was to connect with him, but as the night wore on, something in his eyes began to shift. When I mentioned a recent scary movie I had seen, he leaned in closer, the corners of his mouth twisting into a strange smile. It sent a chill down my spine, but I brushed it off as excitement. The cafe was starting to empty out, and I felt a sense of unease creeping in. It was as if the shadows in the corners were closing in on us, amplifying the tension that had begun to build. I checked my phone, glancing at the time. I needed to head home soon, but something kept me in my seat. Jake suggested we take a walk down the street. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. As we stepped outside, the cool air hit me, and for a moment, I felt alive again. We walked in silence, the only sounds being our footsteps on the pavement and the distant hum of the city. I found myself stealing glances at him, trying to gauge whether the connection was real or if I was just imagining it. We turned down a quieter alleyway, and that's when things took a turn. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. The alley was dimly lit, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways. Jake's demeanor changed too. He became more intense, his gaze piercing through me. I tried to laugh it off, but the laughter felt hollow. He started telling me about his fascination with true crime stories, how the mind of a killer worked. I could feel my heart racing as he described the details of a notorious murder case. It was disturbing, but I didn't want to show my discomfort. I forced a smile, thinking it was just his quirky way of connecting. But then he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. He talked about how he loved to explore the darker sides of human nature. There was a glint in his eyes, something almost predatory. I felt trapped, like a deer caught in headlights, frozen by a mix of fear and intrigue. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but he seemed unfazed, lost in his own dark thoughts. Suddenly, the alley felt too tight, too confining. I needed to get out of there. I made some excuse about needing to go home, and to my relief, he agreed to walk me back to my car. The tension lingered, thick and suffocating. As we reached the parking lot, my car stood like a solitary sentinel under the flickering lights. I fumbled for my keys, my hand shaking slightly. Jake stood too close, his presence overwhelming. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, a strange mix of admiration and something darker. I managed a weak smile, trying to mask the growing knot of dread in my stomach. Just as I was about to unlock the door, he stepped closer, and my instinct screamed at me to retreat. But I didn't want to offend him. I thought about the fun we had shared earlier and how I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. He leaned in, his lips almost brushing against my ear. I caught a whiff of his cologne, something musky and intoxicating, but beneath it, there was an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. His voice dropped to a whisper, and he told me he had something special planned for our next date, a surprise that would take our connection to the next level. A chill ran down my spine. I forced a laugh, but it came out shaky. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in over my head. As he stepped back, I caught a glimpse of something flitting across his face, a shadow of darkness that made my heart race in fear. I didn't know how to respond, so I quickly opened the car door and slid inside, locking it behind me. I watched as he stood there, hands in his pockets, a smile playing on his lips. It was disconcerting, like he was enjoying some private joke. I started the engine, ready to get out of there, but something made me pause. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him still standing there. But he was gone, just vanished. I shook my head, dismissing it as paranoia. I drove through the winding streets, the darkness pressing in on me. When I got home, I locked the door behind me, still feeling the weight of his gaze. I tried to shake off the unease, turning on the TV and distracting myself with some mindless show. But my thoughts kept drifting back to Jake. Who was he really? That night, I dreamed of him. In my dream, we were back in that alley, but it was darker, more oppressive. He stood there, his smile morphing into something sinister. I woke up in a cold sweat, the remnants of the dream clinging to me like a bad smell. The next day, I decided to unmatch with him on Hinge. Something felt off, and I didn't want to take any chances. But as I opened the app, panic coursed through me. There was no trace of him, no messages, no profile. It was as if he had never existed. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a glitch, and went about my day. But as the week went on, I started noticing odd coincidences. Whenever I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. I'd glance around, but no one was there. I kept hearing footsteps behind me, but the streets were always empty. Then came the notes. At first, they were simple sticky notes left on my car. I see you. You can't run from me. My heart raced as I read the words, a sickening dread settling in my stomach. I reported it to the police, but without any solid evidence. They brushed it off. I became a prisoner in my own home, peering through the curtains, jumping at every sound. I couldn't escape the feeling that Jake was still watching, lurking in the shadows. My life spiraled into paranoia, and I was terrified to go outside. Then, one night, I heard a knock at the door. My heart pounded as I crept to the peephole. It was him, Jake, standing there with that same unsettling smile. I stumbled back, fear gripping me. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but before I could dial, the door burst open. The force knocked me back, and there he was, stepping into my sanctuary. I was frozen, caught between disbelief and terror. But then, as he advanced towards me with a glint in his eye, something shifted. I noticed the details, the way his clothes hung loosely, the pallor of his skin. Suddenly, it clicked. This wasn't the guy I had met. This was someone else entirely. I realized he was wearing a mask, a crude imitation of Jake's face. Panic surged through me, and I bolted for the back door. As I ran into the night, I heard the echo of his laughter behind me, a chilling sound that sent me into overdrive. I didn't stop running until I reached the streetlights, my heart pounding in my ears. I turned around, catching my breath, but he was gone. I never saw him again, but the fear lingered. I deleted the app for good and vowed never to trust another stranger again. The darkness that night had consumed me, but I had escaped its grip, at least for now. The shadows still whispered, and I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching me, but I refused to look back. It all started on a typical Thursday night, the kind of night when the week drags on and the weekend feels like a distant dream. I was lounging in my dimly lit room, scrolling through my phone, trying to escape my own thoughts. That's when I came across the Hinge app, flicking through profiles like they were pages in a magazine. Most of them were bland, but then I stumbled upon his profile. His name was Mark, and there was something about his smile that seemed genuine, almost inviting. The photos were well lit, showcasing a life filled with adventure, hiking through lush forests, laughing with friends at some beach bonfire, and even a few candid shots of him cooking. He seemed like the kind of guy you could talk to for hours, the kind of guy who knew how to have fun without taking himself too seriously. I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched almost instantly. The chat started off light, filled with typical icebreakers and jokes. But as we continued talking, I noticed a subtle shift in his tone. It went from playful banter to something darker, a hint of intensity that made my stomach twist nervously. He hinted at a fascination with the unexplained, with the darker aspects of life. At first, I thought it was just a quirky personality trait, but as he shared stories about ghost hunts and urban legends, a chill crept through me. I told myself it was all in good fun, but there was a nagging voice in my head that warned me to tread lightly. As the days passed, we exchanged late-night texts, and the conversations grew deeper. He asked about my fears, my childhood, and even my dreams. It felt like he was peeling back layers of my soul, and I found myself sharing things I wouldn't normally tell anyone. I wanted to impress him, to connect on a level that felt genuine, but I also felt exposed, like he was digging too deep. The more I learned about him, the more I realized he had a way of making the mundane feel ominous. He talked about the abandoned places he visited, the thrill of standing where others had once lived, and the stories that echoed through the empty halls. I couldn't help but feel drawn to him, yet repelled by the unsettling energy that seemed to seep through the screen. After a week of texting, he suggested we meet. My heart raced at the thought. It was thrilling, yet terrifying. We agreed to meet at a local cafe, a cozy spot with vintage decor and a warm ambience. I spent hours getting ready, nervous energy coursing through me. I picked out a simple dress, something that made me feel comfortable yet confident. As I looked in the mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I brushed it aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid. When I arrived at the cafe, my anxiety only intensified. The place was buzzing with life, but it felt more like a stage than a gathering place. I scanned the room, searching for him, and then I spotted Mark sitting in a corner booth, his eyes fixed on me, a smile spreading across his face. He looked just as he did in his pictures, but there was an intensity in his gaze, something that felt both inviting and unsettling. We talked over coffee, and I tried to push past the unease that clung to me like a shadow. The conversation flowed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing a game I didn't fully understand. He spoke with passion about his interests, his voice a low, steady rhythm that somehow soothed my nerves. But every so often he would lean in, his expression shifting to something darker as he recounted tales of strange encounters and unexplained phenomena. I found myself captivated, yet terrified, as he described eerie sounds he'd heard while exploring abandoned buildings, or the feeling of being watched in desolate places. As the evening wore on, I began to notice the small details, the way he occasionally glanced at the door, his fingers tapping anxiously against the table. There was a heaviness in the air, an inexplicable tension that made my heart race. I couldn't tell if it was his presence or something else entirely. The cafe started to empty out, leaving just a few scattered patrons. Mark suggested we take a walk, and against my better judgment, I agreed. We stepped outside into the cool evening air, the streetlights casting a warm glow over the sidewalk. We wandered through quiet streets, and I felt the energy shift. The thrill of the night began to feel more like a trap. Mark pointed out the old buildings, recounting ghost stories connected to each one, his eyes gleaming with excitement. As he spoke, I felt a creeping sense of dread. I had heard enough horror stories to know that curiosity can lead you places you never intended to go. He suddenly suggested we check out an old, deserted park a few blocks away. My instincts screamed at me to refuse, but I found myself nodding. We arrived at the park, and the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The trees loomed overhead like ancient sentinels, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the moonlight. The playground equipment creaked in the wind, a haunting melody that sent chills down my spine. Mark walked ahead, his silhouette framed by the flickering light of the nearby street lamp. As we wandered deeper into the park, I felt a sense of disorientation. The familiar sound of traffic faded into silence, replaced by the rustling leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Mark's stories took on a more sinister tone, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being led into a web spun from his imagination. He stopped near an old, dilapidated gazebo, its wooden structure sagging under years of neglect. He turned to me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something unsettling in his eyes, a glint of excitement mixed with an intensity that made my heart race. He leaned closer, and I could smell the faint hint of his cologne, mingling with the earthy scent of the park. He began to recount a story about a couple that had disappeared in the very gazebo we stood near. I felt the ground beneath me shift, the unease tightening its grip. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as he described their last known moments, a chilling account that sent a rush of adrenaline through my veins. Just as he reached the climax of the story, something caught my eye, a figure darting between the trees. My heart dropped, and I felt a surge of panic. I turned to Mark, but he had an almost predatory look on his face, his smile widening. He didn't seem to notice my fear. Instead, he continued, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, but the park was empty, the only sound the rustling leaves above. I could feel Mark's gaze on me, his expression shifting from excitement to something darker, more predatory. I took a step back, my instinct screaming at me to run. The stories he had told began to blur with reality, and I realized I was standing in the very spot where he had described the couple's last moments. In that moment, clarity struck me. Mark wasn't just a guy fascinated by the paranormal. He was someone who thrived on fear, who reveled in the thrill of the unknown. I felt my heart pound, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I turned to leave. But before I could take a step, I heard a voice, soft, almost melodious, calling from the shadows. My breath hitched as I turned back to find Mark standing there, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that made me question everything. I backed away slowly, the reality of the situation crashing down like a wave. The stories he told no longer felt like fiction. They felt like a warning. I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the quiet night. But I could feel him behind me, an ominous presence that haunted my every move. I burst out of the park, the streetlights flooding me with light, and I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my apartment. That night, I locked the door and leaned against it, gasping for breath. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at it, my heart sinking. It was a message from Mark, a simple question. "Did you enjoy the stories?" I stared at the screen, a chill crawling up my spine. Who was he really? I had thought I was playing a game, but it felt like I had stumbled into a nightmare. The thrill had turned into terror, and I realized there was no escaping the darkness that lingered just beneath the surface of his charming facade. I never answered, and as the days turned into weeks, I hoped he would fade into memory. But every so often, I would catch a glimpse of his face in my mind, the intensity of his gaze etched into my memory, and the shadows of that park lingered, a reminder that some stories are better left untold, some encounters better left unmade. I had never taken online dating seriously. You know how it is, friends hyping it up, swiping left and right, and pretending to be interested in some carefully curated profiles that could easily be mistaken for marketing brochures. But when I moved to a new city for work, I figured, why not? I needed to meet people, and the thought of going out alone to bars or clubs felt daunting. So I downloaded Hinge, thinking it would be a fun way to connect. At first, it was just a game. I spent hours scrolling through photos and bios, chuckling at the cliches. Most guys seemed harmless, like they were auditioning for a rom-com. Eventually, I stumbled upon Sam. His profile was different. There was a depth to his eyes that intrigued me, a hint of something I couldn't quite put my finger on. He had a passion for photography, and his pictures were stunning. Landscapes shrouded in mist, portraits that captured raw emotions. I swiped right, and to my surprise, he matched with me almost instantly. We started chatting, and his messages were thoughtful, engaging. He didn't just throw out generic compliments. He asked questions that made me think. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, the way they flowed so naturally. He suggested we meet up, and my heart raced with excitement and nerves. We agreed on a coffee shop downtown, a cozy little place with exposed brick walls and vintage furniture. The day arrived, and I could hardly focus on work. I kept checking the time, my mind racing with possibilities. I arrived early, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. I settled into a corner booth, fidgeting with my phone, waiting for him to arrive. When he walked in, a sense of calm washed over me. He looked exactly like his pictures, tall, with tousled hair and a warm smile that made my heart flutter. We talked for hours, sharing stories, laughter, and a few comfortable silences. Sam was charming, but there was an underlying intensity in his gaze that made me feel exposed. I brushed it off as nerves. Maybe I was just overthinking it. As we left the cafe, he suggested a walk through the nearby park. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over everything. It felt magical, and I was swept up in the moment. But as we wandered deeper into the park, the atmosphere shifted. The trees loomed larger, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers. The laughter of children faded into the distance, replaced by an eerie stillness. I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, a sense of being watched. I glanced at Sam, who seemed lost in thought, his smile fading as the shadows stretched around us. He led me down a less traveled path, one that felt almost too secluded. I hesitated, a small voice in my head urging me to turn back, but I pushed it aside. I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. As we walked, he began sharing stories about his photography. They were haunting, almost morbid tales of places he had explored, abandoned buildings, forgotten towns, and eerie landscapes that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. I found myself captivated, yet unsettled. Then he mentioned a specific location, an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of the city. My heart raced at the thought of it. As I listened, I could feel the air grow heavier around us, thick with tension. It felt as if the trees were closing in, the shadows creeping closer, and I suddenly regretted not bringing a friend along. I tried to laugh it off, asking him if he had ever been to such a place. He hesitated, his gaze darkening as he replied that he had, and that it was a place he'd never forget. The sun dipped below the horizon, and I suggested we head back. But Sam's demeanor changed. He insisted we keep going, his voice laced with an urgency that sent a chill down my spine. "I want to show you something," he said, and before I could protest, he took my hand, leading me deeper into the woods. I felt a surge of panic. The path was narrowing, and the darkness was closing in around us. My heart raced, every instinct screaming at me to run. I tried to pull away, but he gripped my hand tighter. "Trust me," he said, his tone firm yet soothing. I could see the intensity in his eyes, and for a moment I remembered the kind stranger I had met at the coffee shop, the one who made me laugh. But that warmth was gone, replaced by something primal, something unsettling. We reached a clearing, and I was hit by a wave of unease. In the center stood an old, dilapidated building, its windows shattered and walls covered in dark graffiti. Moonlight spilled over the structure, creating an otherworldly aura. It looked like something out of a horror movie, and my heart sank. "This is it," he said, his voice almost reverent. "The asylum." I wanted to turn back, but Sam was already stepping forward, urging me to follow. My instinct screamed at me to run, but curiosity mixed with fear kept my feet rooted to the ground. I felt like I was in a nightmare, unable to wake up. As we approached the entrance, I noticed a faint flickering light inside. My breath caught in my throat. Sam pushed open the door, and it creaked ominously. The light illuminated a hallway filled with old medical equipment, shadows dancing along the walls. I stepped inside, feeling the weight of the air pressing down on me. The atmosphere was thick with decay, and I could almost hear the echoes of the past whispering through the halls. As he explored, I hung back, my heart racing. I could hear him talking to himself, his voice low and almost conspiratorial. I strained to catch what he was saying, phrases that sent shivers down my spine. They never believed me. The truth is hidden, and they're watching. My mind raced, panic igniting as I realized I was utterly alone in this dark, forgotten place. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from deeper within the asylum, and I jumped. Sam turned, his eyes wild with excitement. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his face alight with a strange fervor. I wanted to scream, to run, but he grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the sound. I fought against him, but he was stronger, dragging me further into the darkness. We reached a room filled with scattered debris and shattered glass. Sam's eyes glinted in the dim light as he pointed to something in the corner. My stomach churned as I looked closer. It was a collection of photographs, all depicting the same unsettling scene. Faces twisted in terror, trapped in the asylum's walls. Each image was more disturbing than the last, and I felt bile rise in my throat. Then I saw it. In the background of one of the photographs, a figure stood watching. A chill swept through me as I recognized the face. It was mine, taken from the coffee shop that very day. My heart pounded, and I stumbled back, realizing the horror that unfolded before me. Sam was not just a photographer. He was something far more sinister. In that moment of realization, I locked eyes with him. The warmth I had felt earlier evaporated into the cold, hard reality of who he truly was. I turned to run, adrenaline coursing through me, but the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped in his twisted gallery of nightmares, the walls closing in, and the shadows around me thickening, echoing with the voices of those who had come before me. As I banged on the door, shouting for help, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The flickering light above began to fade, casting long shadows that danced menacingly on the walls. I knew then that this was more than just a bad day. This was a nightmare come to life, and I was the next subject in his terrifying collection. The last thing I saw was Sam's smile, twisted and dark as he stepped closer, the shadows swallowing me whole. In that moment, I realized I wouldn't just be another story. I was becoming part of his chilling legend, captured forever in the darkened corners of his mind. And somewhere, deep down, I understood that I was never meant to leave this place. I had never taken online dating seriously. You know how it is, friends hyping it up, swiping left and right, and pretending to be interested in some carefully curated profiles that could easily be mistaken for marketing brochures. But when I moved to a new city for work, I figured, why not? I needed to meet people, and the thought of going out alone to bars or clubs felt daunting. So I downloaded Hinge, thinking it would be a fun way to connect. At first, it was just a game. I spent hours scrolling through photos and bios, chuckling at the cliches. Most guys seemed harmless, like they were auditioning for a rom-com. Eventually, I stumbled upon Sam. His profile was different. There was a depth to his eyes that intrigued me, a hint of something I couldn't quite put my finger on. He had a passion for photography, and his pictures were stunning. Landscapes shrouded in mist, portraits that captured raw emotions. I swiped right, and to my surprise, he matched with me almost instantly. We started chatting, and his messages were thoughtful, engaging. He didn't just throw out generic compliments. He asked questions that made me think. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, the way they flowed so naturally. He suggested we meet up, and my heart raced with excitement and nerves. We agreed on a coffee shop downtown, a cozy little place with exposed brick walls and vintage furniture. The day arrived, and I could hardly focus on work. I kept checking the time, my mind racing with possibilities. I arrived early, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. I settled into a corner booth, fidgeting with my phone, waiting for him to arrive. When he walked in, a sense of calm washed over me. He looked exactly like his pictures, tall, with tousled hair and a warm smile that made my heart flutter. We talked for hours, sharing stories, laughter, and a few comfortable silences. Sam was charming, but there was an underlying intensity in his gaze that made me feel exposed. I brushed it off as nerves. Maybe I was just overthinking it. As we left the cafe, he suggested a walk through the nearby park. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over everything. It felt magical, and I was swept up in the moment. But as we wandered deeper into the park, the atmosphere shifted. The trees loomed larger, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers. The laughter of children faded into the distance, replaced by an eerie stillness. I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, a sense of being watched. I glanced at Sam, who seemed lost in thought, his smile fading as the shadows stretched around us. He led me down a less traveled path, one that felt almost too secluded. I hesitated, a small voice in my head urging me to turn back, but I pushed it aside. I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. As we walked, he began sharing stories about his photography. They were haunting, almost morbid tales of places he had explored, abandoned buildings, forgotten towns, and eerie landscapes that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. I found myself captivated, yet unsettled. Then he mentioned a specific location, an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of the city. My heart raced at the thought of it. As I listened, I could feel the air grow heavier around us, thick with tension. It felt as if the trees were closing in, the shadows creeping closer, and I suddenly regretted not bringing a friend along. I tried to laugh it off, asking him if he had ever been to such a place. He hesitated, his gaze darkening as he replied that he had, and that it was a place he'd never forget. The sun dipped below the horizon, and I suggested we head back. But Sam's demeanor changed. He insisted we keep going, his voice laced with an urgency that sent a chill down my spine. "I want to show you something," he said, and before I could protest, he took my hand, leading me deeper into the woods. I felt a surge of panic. The path was narrowing, and the darkness was closing in around us. My heart raced, every instinct screaming at me to run. I tried to pull away, but he gripped my hand tighter. "Trust me," he said, his tone firm yet soothing. I could see the intensity in his eyes, and for a moment I remembered the kind stranger I had met at the coffee shop, the one who made me laugh. But that warmth was gone, replaced by something primal, something unsettling. We reached a clearing, and I was hit by a wave of unease. In the center stood an old, dilapidated building, its windows shattered and walls covered in dark graffiti. Moonlight spilled over the structure, creating an otherworldly aura. It looked like something out of a horror movie, and my heart sank. "This is it," he said, his voice almost reverent. "The asylum." I wanted to turn back, but Sam was already stepping forward, urging me to follow. My instinct screamed at me to run, but curiosity mixed with fear kept my feet rooted to the ground. I felt like I was in a nightmare, unable to wake up. As we approached the entrance, I noticed a faint flickering light inside. My breath caught in my throat. Sam pushed open the door, and it creaked ominously. The light illuminated a hallway filled with old medical equipment, shadows dancing along the walls. I stepped inside, feeling the weight of the air pressing down on me. The atmosphere was thick with decay, and I could almost hear the echoes of the past whispering through the halls. As he explored, I hung back, my heart racing. I could hear him talking to himself, his voice low and almost conspiratorial. I strained to catch what he was saying, phrases that sent shivers down my spine. They never believed me. The truth is hidden, and they're watching. My mind raced, panic igniting as I realized I was utterly alone in this dark, forgotten place. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from deeper within the asylum, and I jumped. Sam turned, his eyes wild with excitement. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his face alight with a strange fervor. I wanted to scream, to run, but he grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the sound. I fought against him, but he was stronger, dragging me further into the darkness. We reached a room filled with scattered debris and shattered glass. Sam's eyes glinted in the dim light as he pointed to something in the corner. My stomach churned as I looked closer. It was a collection of photographs, all depicting the same unsettling scene. Faces twisted in terror, trapped in the asylum's walls. Each image was more disturbing than the last, and I felt bile rise in my throat. Then I saw it. In the background of one of the photographs, a figure stood watching. A chill swept through me as I recognized the face. It was mine, taken from the coffee shop that very day. My heart pounded, and I stumbled back, realizing the horror that unfolded before me. Sam was not just a photographer. He was something far more sinister. In that moment of realization, I locked eyes with him. The warmth I had felt earlier evaporated into the cold, hard reality of who he truly was. I turned to run, adrenaline coursing through me, but the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped in his twisted gallery of nightmares, the walls closing in, and the shadows around me thickening, echoing with the voices of those who had come before me. As I banged on the door, shouting for help, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The flickering light above began to fade, casting long shadows that danced menacingly on the walls. I knew then that this was more than just a bad day. This was a nightmare come to life, and I was the next subject in his terrifying collection. The last thing I saw was Sam's smile, twisted and dark as he stepped closer, the shadows swallowing me whole. In that moment, I realized I wouldn't just be another story. I was becoming part of his chilling legend, captured forever in the darkened corners of his mind. And somewhere, deep down, I understood that I was never meant to leave this place. I finally caved in. After months of hearing my friends rave about dating apps, I decided to give it a shot. It was one of those cold, rainy nights when I found myself scrolling through Hinge, half-heartedly liking profiles that popped up. The glow of my phone screen illuminated my small apartment, casting shadows that danced across the walls like restless spirits. I was looking for something: companionship, distraction, maybe even a little thrill. I didn't know it then, but I was about to get a whole lot more than I bargained for. There was this guy named Mark. He had one of those charming smiles that made you think he'd just stepped out of a rom-com. His profile was filled with witty one-liners and adventurous photos from his travels. He seemed fun, maybe even a little mysterious, but then again, mystery can be alluring. I swiped right instinctively, my thumb hovering over his picture longer than usual. We matched almost immediately, and a rush of excitement coursed through me. Mark messaged me within minutes. His texts were playful, laced with humor and a touch of flirtation. We chatted back and forth, and I found myself leaning into the conversation, captivated. The rain tapped against my window, creating a rhythm that matched the growing tension in our exchange. He suggested we meet, and without thinking too much about it, I agreed. I was caught up in the moment, the excitement of new possibilities overwhelming any caution I might have felt. We decided to meet at a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of town. The kind of place where the atmosphere is thick with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries. When I arrived, the cafe was almost empty, the soft jazz playing in the background adding a cozy vibe to the dim lighting. I spotted him right away. He was seated at a corner table, his silhouette framed by the light from a nearby window. He looked just like his pictures, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made me hesitate for a moment. As I approached, he stood up and flashed that same charming smile. The initial awkwardness melted away as we talked over coffee, and I felt a surge of relief. He was just as engaging in person, his laughter infectious. But beneath the surface, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling. It was as if there were layers to him I hadn't yet uncovered. As the evening wore on, I noticed how he would occasionally glance towards the window, his expression shifting slightly, as if he were waiting for something or someone. After a couple of hours, the cafe began to empty out, the staff starting to clean up around us. I suggested we move to a nearby park, wanting to prolong the evening. He agreed, but I sensed a flicker of unease cross his face. Still, we walked together, the night air crisp and refreshing. The streetlights cast a warm glow, illuminating the path ahead, but the shadows loomed larger as we ventured deeper into the park. We settled on a bench, and for a while, everything felt perfect. We shared stories, laughed, and the world seemed to fade away. But as the clock ticked on, I caught him glancing at his phone repeatedly. Each time, his smile faded a little more, replaced by a tightness in his jaw. I asked if everything was okay, but he brushed it off, claiming it was just work. But then, I noticed a figure lingering at the edge of the park, partially hidden by trees. My heart raced, and I tried to focus on Mark, but my eyes kept darting back to the shadowy figure. I wasn't sure if it was the dim light playing tricks on me, but it felt wrong. I could see the outline of what appeared to be a person, their posture rigid and unmoving. Mark's demeanor shifted, too. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper as he spoke about his past, weaving a tale that was both intriguing and unsettling. I was drawn in, but the figure in the distance gnawed at my mind. I tried to shake off the creeping dread, convincing myself it was just my anxiety getting the better of me. Then it happened. The figure stepped forward, revealing a woman in a dark coat, her face obscured by a hood. I could barely make out her features, but there was something familiar about her. My gut twisted. Mark's eyes widened as he turned to look behind us, and in that instant, everything changed. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the ground, shattering the tranquil atmosphere of the park. Before I could process what was happening, the woman called out his name. It was like a knife slicing through the air, sharp and piercing. Mark's expression shifted from surprise to something darker, a mix of anger and fear. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized this wasn't just an unexpected encounter. It was a confrontation. I sat frozen on the bench, caught in a whirlwind of confusion and dread. The woman stepped closer, her voice a low murmur as she spoke to Mark. I tried to catch snippets of their conversation, but it was a blur of hushed words and tense body language. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear, my instincts telling me to run, to get as far away as possible. But then, just as suddenly as it began, their exchange escalated. Mark's voice rose, and I caught fragments of angry accusations and defensive claims. My mind raced, wondering what dark secrets he had hidden beneath that charming exterior. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen, but it was just a notification, a distraction I didn't need. The confrontation reached a boiling point as Mark's face twisted in rage. He turned away from the woman, his back to me. And that's when I saw it, a flash of metal as he pulled something from his pocket. My stomach dropped. I instinctively stood, ready to bolt, but I was rooted in place, paralyzed by the unfolding scene. In a split second, the woman lunged, and my heart stopped. I could hardly breathe as I braced myself for the worst. But just as quickly as it started, the tension snapped. Mark stumbled back, his face pale, the object falling from his hand, a small blade glinting in the moonlight. I blinked, trying to process what I was witnessing. The woman didn't advance. Instead, she stepped back, her expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. My heart raced as I realized there was something deeper at play here. Mark's facade cracked, his bravado peeling away to reveal a man trapped in a web of lies. I could see it in his eyes, fear, regret, and a desperate plea for understanding. As the confrontation fizzled, I took a step back, wanting to escape the chaos, but unable to look away. The woman turned to leave, and as she did, I caught a glimpse of her face. My heart sank. She looked familiar, someone I had seen before, someone I thought I knew. Suddenly, it clicked. She was an old friend from high school, someone I hadn't seen in years. Memories rushed back, shared laughter, secrets whispered in the hallways. But the look on her face was one of betrayal, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just confronting Mark. She was confronting the ghosts of their past, a past that I had unwittingly stepped into. Mark's eyes darted to me, realizing I had been a witness to the whole scene. A moment of panic crossed his features, and I knew I had to leave. I turned and fled, my heart pounding, the night air sharp against my skin. I didn't look back, but the haunting realization settled in. Sometimes, the monsters we meet on dating apps aren't just strangers. They're echoes from our own lives, reminding us of the shadows we try to escape. As I raced home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a tangled web of secrets and lies, and I had unwittingly become a part of it. The thrill of that first swipe had turned into a nightmare, and I was left wondering what other horrors awaited in the dark corners of the digital world. I had never thought much about dating apps until my friends insisted I give it a shot. I was a little skeptical, to say the least. I mean, who really finds love scrolling through photos and bios? But there I was, swiping left and right, trying to convince myself that this was just a fun distraction. Hinge, they said, was different. It wasn't just about looks. People actually put thought into their profiles. I figured I might as well try it. I set up my profile on a rainy Saturday afternoon, the sound of raindrops tapping on my window adding a strangely soothing backdrop to the whole process. I carefully selected photos that captured my goofy spirit, added quirky prompts that showcased my humor, and waited. It wasn't long before notifications started rolling in, and I found myself locked in a whirlwind of conversations. Some were mundane, others surprisingly engaging. Then, I matched with someone named Mark. His profile was intriguing, filled with thoughtful prompts and stories that pulled me in. He had an uncanny way with words. Each message felt like a glimpse into a complex mind. I found myself excitedly looking forward to our chats, often losing track of time as I typed away deep into the night. The conversations flowed effortlessly, covering everything from our favorite movies to our deepest fears. But as the days passed, I began to notice something strange about Mark. It was subtle at first, like a faint whisper on the edge of my awareness. He would often mention his unique perspective on life and how he felt misunderstood by most people. At first, it piqued my interest. I was always drawn to the unconventional. But then the messages took a darker turn. He spoke of loneliness and isolation, of feeling like a puppet in a world full of marionettes. It made my stomach turn, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. As we continued to chat, I felt an odd mix of fascination and discomfort. I started to wonder if I was delving too deep into someone's psyche, or if he was simply trying to share his truth. Nonetheless, I decided to meet him. We set a date for a Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop, one that I knew was always bustling with people. I figured that if things got weird, I could always leave. The day arrived, and I dressed carefully, wanting to strike a balance between casual and put together. As I walked to the cafe, the sun peeked shyly through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the streets. I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. What would he be like in person? Would he be the same as the captivating figure I had been chatting with for weeks? When I finally arrived, I scanned the cafe for him. I spotted a tall figure in the corner, his back turned to me. I approached cautiously, heart racing. He turned around, and I was struck by the intensity of his gaze. He had sharp features, deep-set eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. There was an unsettling intensity about him, but I brushed it off as my imagination. We talked for hours, and while parts of the conversation felt normal, there were moments that sent chills down my spine. He spoke about life as if it were a game, and people were merely pieces on a board. I laughed it off initially, thinking he was just being playful. But the more he spoke, the more I felt the weight of his words. Do you ever wonder what it would be like to see things from another person's perspective? He asked, his voice low and smooth. I nodded, but inside, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. I was beginning to realize that this wasn't just a casual coffee chat. There was something lurking beneath the surface of his charm, something dark and twisted. After a while, I excused myself to go to the restroom, hoping that a moment away would clear my head. As I walked through the narrow hallway, I caught sight of a flickering light coming from a small, dimly lit room at the end. My curiosity got the better of me, and I walked towards it. The door creaked open, revealing a storage closet piled with boxes and old furniture. But what made my heart race was the wall covered in photographs. Each picture was of people, some smiling, some looking fearful. My breath caught in my throat when I recognized a few faces. They were the same ones I had swiped through on Hinge. There were notes scribbled underneath each photo, detailing their profiles, their likes, and what they had shared in their conversations with Mark. Panic surged through me as I stumbled back, almost colliding with the doorframe. I needed to get out of there, but I knew I had to confront him first. I returned to the table, my hands trembling slightly. Mark noticed immediately, his expression shifting from charming to predatory. "Everything all right?" he asked, his smile widening in a way that felt menacing. I forced a smile back, but my heart was pounding in my chest. "I just needed a moment," I said, trying to sound casual. As we continued to talk, I felt the atmosphere change. There was a palpable tension in the air, and the bustling cafe that had felt welcoming earlier now felt suffocating. I could see the way his eyes flickered with something that made my skin crawl. "I find people fascinating," he said suddenly, leaning in closer. "Their stories, their fears, their desires. It's like peeling back layers of an onion to get to the core of who they really are." I wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it as a quirky comment, but the weight of his words hung in the air like a storm cloud. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in over my head. Finally, I mustered the courage to suggest we cut the meeting short. I made up an excuse about an early morning the next day. He nodded, but his eyes told a different story. They were filled with a mixture of disappointment and something else, something darker that I couldn't quite place. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with dread. I hurried home, locking the door behind me as if that would keep whatever had just happened at bay. I tried to shake off the feeling, convincing myself that I had simply let my imagination run wild. But as the days passed, I couldn't escape the memories of that encounter. I found myself looking over my shoulder, checking the locks on my doors multiple times before bed. I even removed the app from my phone, wanting to distance myself from that world altogether. Then one night, as I lay in bed, a notification pinged on my phone. It was an email from Hinge. My heart raced as I opened it, only to find a message from Mark. The subject line read, "I miss our conversations." Chills ran down my spine as I read the message. He spoke of how he felt a connection with me, how he couldn't help but think about our time together. And then it hit me. He wasn't just an oddball, he was obsessed. The next morning, I gathered my courage and reported him to the app, hoping to put an end to this nightmare. But as I pressed send, another notification popped up. It was a message from Mark again. "You can't escape me. You're part of my story now." My blood ran cold as I realized my life had turned into something out of a thriller novel. I glanced at the window, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me. The walls of my own home felt like they were closing in, the shadows creeping closer. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. I had to get away, to change my routine, to disappear from this life. But deep down, I knew I was already trapped in a story I never wanted to be a part of. And the worst part, I had unknowingly invited him into my life.